Well, good day, everybody. This is Chris, and what I'd like to do today is just do a quick, or a brief introduction to anatomical terminology. So when it comes to any sort of field, be it in the sciences or the arts or humanities, when we're dealing with talking about something, there are certain phrases, words, etc. There are certain concepts that we all have to agree on. Otherwise, everybody kind of has their own language or their own specific pet term that they use to mean what they're trying to convey. And so what we'd have to do is we have to get everybody on the same page, and this is no different in anatomy and physiology. So the foundation of any science, biology, specifically anatomy and physiology, the foundation needs to be built upon a common language where everybody's on the same page. And so that's what I want to just review today. And this is what we'll be talking about in our first lab, and this is what we'll be talking about in the first lecture as well, is just a basic terminology that we've all come to agree upon. And so when it comes to looking at the human body, first thing that we do is we always place the human body into an idealized position, even if you're maybe taking care of a patient and they're not in an ideal position, they're in some weird position. We would chart injuries and we document stuff as if we had them placed in what's known as the anatomical position. The anatomical position is where we place our human subject. We place them in a standing position. The front of their body is facing toward you. Okay, the palms of their hands are facing forward. Okay, so you can see in my little demonstration here, I have him standing up. Okay, palms are facing forward, feet are facing forward, and this is the classic anatomical position. And so whenever we're identifying anatomical features, we always revert to placing our patient in this anatomical position to talk about these features. That way everybody's on the same page. We all know what we're talking about. Now, there are some terms that we need to use to identify key anatomical features. And the first major terms are terms that we use to identify the front of the body, okay, the front part of the body versus the back part of the body, okay? So, typically, we say the front. There are two common words that we use to identify the front of the body, and we'll either say anterior, okay, the anterior aspect, okay, or some people will use the term ventral. Anterior ventral's front, and then posterior, okay, posterior or dorsal would be back, okay, so I have anterior or ventral, posterior or dorsal, and I just think of a dorsal fin, like on say a dolphin has a dorsal fin, or certain fishes have dorsal fins. Okay, that's on the back, so dorsal back, ventral front. Okay, and then we can even get a bit more complicated if you wanted, and we could compare certain areas of the body, and we could say, for example, the chin. If I was, say, comparing the chin to the neck, okay, I could say that the chin is more, or is what, to the neck. Well, I could say that the chin is anterior to the neck, okay, it is more anterior than the neck, and I could also say that the neck would be posterior, the back of the neck would be posterior to the chin. Okay, so I could also use the terminology in that context, in a compare and contrast sort of context. Now, whenever we're talking about the human body, when we're pointing out features on the right versus the left side of the body, we are always going with the patient's right and the patient's left, not your right or your left. It is very important, because when I'm looking at somebody, okay, and let's say that I have some sort of injury right here, okay? When I look at this, that injury would appear to be on my right, okay? Because I'm looking at it with my right eye, my right hand is pointing to it. But it is in fact on the patient's, okay, again, placing the patient in the anatomical position, that would be on the patient's left. So that's the next big thing. Whenever we're talking about location, right or left, it's always the patient's right, it's always the patient's left, not your right or your left. So there's a little flop that has, a little flip or flop that has to happen in your thinking. So when you're coming up against questions, slow down and imagine the patient in the anatomical position and then work from there. Okay, so there are also some other terms that we need to be familiar with, okay? And these terms tend to be more focused on talking about the extremities. The extremities are, okay, the arms and the legs for the most part. Okay, these are anatomical features that come away from the core of the body, okay, the core of the body, if you will. Imagine that this is the core, the head, the chest, the spine, okay, the pelvic girdle, and then you have your appendages, okay, the appendages that come off of this. And this core of the body is sometimes known as the axial skeleton, and then the appendicular being appendages. Okay, so we also have that as well. And so when I look at a limb, what I can do is I can go, okay, where does this limb attach? Okay, where does it attach to the core, the trunk of the body? Well, the arm attaches here at the shoulder, right? So this is the point of attachment. And what I can say is, if I look, as I move toward the point of attachment to the body, I could say proximal. Proximal is a term that means moving toward the point of attachment. And distal would be moving away from the point of attachment, or moving away from the core of the body. And I often use distal and proximal as a way of comparing and contrasting. For example, I could say that if I were to compare the thumb to the elbow here, I could say, or I would say, I'd be correct in saying that the thumb is distal to the elbow, right? It is further away from the point of attachment. I could also alternatively say that the elbow, okay, is proximal to the thumb. It is closer. However, the shoulder, okay, would be proximal or more proximal than the elbow, okay, and the elbow would be distal to the shoulder, okay. So I have distal, think of a distance, and then I have proximal, closer in, okay. Some people will also say that proximal and distal has to do with something known as the midline. And when we talk about the midline, what you do is you imagine the body back in the anatomical position, and then you draw, or you imagine an imaginary line that splits the body in right and left, exactly in right and left. Okay, so it's a line, it's an imaginary line that goes through this way here, all the way through, and literally splits the body in a right half and a left half, and that line is known as the midline, okay? And the terminology that we typically use to describe anatomical features that are closer to the midline is the word medial. Medial means closer to the midline, and lateral means away from the midline. So for example, let's look at the shoulder versus the sternum here, the breastbone. Okay, the shoulder would be lateral to the sternum, right? The sternum would be medial to the shoulder, right? The sternum is closer to the midline, the shoulder is further away from the midline. Okay, I could also say, I could compare the eye to the nose, and the eye would be lateral, right? Further away from the midline compared to the nose, okay? And then when we document, sometimes if, say, there's an injury, we could say that there was an injury 2 centimeters, okay? We'll say 2 centimeters lateral to the center of the sternum. Okay, so this is a sternum here, that's the center, and then I go 2 centimeters lateral to that, and there would be my injury. So you can see how we can start to use these basic anatomical terms to start identifying very specific areas of the body. Okay, so we have anterior or ventral, we have posterior or dorsal. Okay, I have proximal, distal, I have medial, and I have lateral. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about is I want to talk about how we can look at the body. There are certain views or certain planes that we can use to look at the body. And what we do is, I imagine that you are slicing the body up into different sections, okay? Sometimes this is done in a dissection. Sometimes this slicing is done with certain types of imaging where you can put somebody in a scanner and you can do a CT scan or an MRI or a PET scan. And these different medical imaging modalities, x-rays as well, will look at a certain view of the body. And that certain view will look along a certain plane. So what I like to do is I like to imagine, let me just grab a sheet of paper. Okay, again, let's start at that midline. So imagine that you have that midline there, okay? So this is the midline. And if I were to cut the body in half along that midline into a right side and a left side, okay, right along the midline there, okay, right side, left side, we would call that a mid-sagittal view, okay? That is a mid-sagittal view. Okay, and I cut the body perfectly in half, left or right. Okay, I cut the body and then I pull it apart and I look at the open part of one of those cuts. Okay, that would be what's called a mid-sagittal view. Okay, the mid-sagittal view is very good at looking at some of the major body cavities, which is something we'll talk about here in a little bit. Okay, the mid-sagittal view. Now, I could also, instead of cutting the body perfectly into a right side and left side, I could make my cut away from that midline. I could perhaps make my cut here. Okay, it would still be a sagittal, but it would not be a mid-sagittal view at that point, right? Mid-sagittal is perfectly in line with the midline. Okay, if I made a cut here and went down, okay, we would call that a parasagittal view. Okay? Okay, so that's one way. The other way is if I were to cut the body, instead of a sagittal view, I could cut the body perfectly in half down this way, and I could separate the anterior portion from the posterior portion. Okay, so imagine slicing a body, and then I could remove the front, remove the back. Okay, this is known as a frontal view, okay, or a coronal view. A frontal view or a coronal view when I go and I cut it that way. Okay. And finally, another way that I could do this is I could take a cross section. Okay, I could cut the body in half this way here. Okay, so imagine a big knife coming and cutting the body in half. Oops, this way here. Okay, that would produce a cross section or a transverse view. Okay, so let's just go ahead and review these real quick. All right, so I have my mid-sagittal view right along the midline, perfectly right in half. Off of the midline is parasagittal view. Okay, cutting this way and producing a view where I am separating the anterior from the posterior surface of the body would produce a frontal or coronal view. And then finally I could cut the body this way, okay, and I could do that in many different locations, but either way that would produce a cross section or a transverse view. Okay guys, so those are just some of the basic anatomical terms to get us all on the same page when talking about anatomy and physiology. Hopefully you found that video helpful.